Family mocked my online business. Then my Forbes feature went viral and they needed loans. But that came much later. Before the magazine cover, before the seven-figure valuation, there was just me, Anna, in my tiny one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, surrounded by boxes of shipping supplies and the constant, metallic smell of solder. My life was a chaotic landscape of jewelry pliers, spools of silver wire, and half-empty cups of coffee that had long gone cold. My family mocked my online business, but my tiny apartment was filled with jewelry pliers and solder. They laughed at my tiny beads, but I was building something more. Subscribe and like to see where this led me. The worst of it was always at family gatherings. I remember one Sunday dinner at my aunt's house like it was yesterday. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and my Uncle Kevin's smug satisfaction. He was a regional manager for a mid-level insurance company and acted like he was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. He sat at the head of the table, holding a wine glass like it was a trophy. "So, Anna," he said, his voice booming across the table, making everyone quiet down. "Still playing with your little beads and wires? How's that online business of yours coming along?" He put air quotes around online business, and my cousin Justin snickered into his napkin. Justin had just gotten a promotion at his father's law firm. He wore a Brooks Brothers suit that probably cost more than my entire inventory. I felt a familiar heat rise to my cheeks. "It's going well, Uncle Kevin. I just launched a new collection." "A collection?" Justin chimed in, leaning forward. "That's cute. Did you sell one yet? Or are you still just taking pretty pictures for your little blog?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I've had a few orders. It's growing." "A few orders," Kevin repeated slowly, savoring the words. He turned to the rest of the family. "You see? Our Anna is a real entrepreneur, selling her little trinkets on the internet. Just don't forget to pay your rent, sweetheart. Those hobbies don't exactly come with a 401k. The table erupted in polite, condescending laughter. I looked down at my plate, my appetite gone. They saw my passion as a joke, a childish hobby that I refused to outgrow. They saw my late nights and my sacrifices as a failure to get a real job like Justin. They didn't see the spreadsheets I stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting, the market research I did, or the careful branding I was building from scratch. They just saw beads and wires. I went home that night and sat on the floor of my living room, which was also my workshop and shipping department. The rent check for $1,200 was due in 3 days, and my business account had exactly $1,450 in it. For a second, Kevin's words echoed in my head. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just playing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos of my friends on vacation, at happy hours, buying condos, and here I was, surrounded by cardboard boxes, smelling like metal polish. I felt tears welling up, a wave of despair washing over me. Just as I was about to give in to it, my eyes landed on a framed photo on my desk. It was of me and my grandfather George, taken years ago at his workshop. He was a carpenter, a man who built beautiful, sturdy furniture with his own hands. He had passed away 2 years prior, but his words were etched into my memory. He was the only one who ever took my little hobby seriously. I remembered sitting with him once, complaining that no one understood what I was trying to build. He had been sanding a piece of oak, his hands covered in fine dust. He stopped, looked at me with his kind, knowing eyes, and said something I never forgot. My grandfather George always said, "They only see the fruit, Anna, never the roots you grew in the dark." Thinking of his voice, of his unwavering belief in me, was like a splash of cold water. He was right. They couldn't see the roots. They couldn't see the foundation I was painstakingly laying day after day, night after night. They would only see the final product if I ever got there. And in that moment, sitting on my cold apartment floor, I made a promise to myself and to his memory. I would make them see. My best friend Jessica called a few minutes later. She was my one-person cheerleading squad. "Ignore them," she said after I recounted the dinner. "Kevin is just mad because his life is painfully average, and you're actually daring to do something interesting. Now tell me, how did the new moonstone necklace photos turn out?" Her voice grounded me. We talked for an hour about marketing strategies, about a fashion blogger she knew who might be interested in a collaboration. By the time we hung up, the despair was gone, replaced by a familiar, stubborn fire. I got up, wiped my eyes, and went back to my workbench. I had orders to fill. It was only a handful, but it was a start. It was my start. I worked until the sun came up, the words of my grandfather playing on a loop in my mind. The roots were growing, even if no one else could see them. They were growing deeper and stronger in the dark. The months that followed were a blur of silver dust and shipping labels. I lived and breathed my business. My social life disappeared, replaced by late-night trips to the 24-hour post office. I learned about SEO, about Instagram algorithms, about supply chain management. Every dollar I made went right back into the business, buying better tools or higher quality gemstones. The growth was slow, painfully slow, but it was steady. I went from a handful of orders a week to a dozen. My bank account was no longer hovering on the edge of disaster, but it was far from comfortable. I was surviving, not thriving. One night, while packing orders until 2 a.m., I was on the phone with Jessica. "You need a bigger audience, Anna," she said, her voice practical as always. "That blogger I told you about, Lauren, she's getting huge. She focuses on sustainable and independent brands. You're exactly what her followers are looking for." The idea felt terrifying. Lauren had over 200,000 followers. She was a real influencer, living in a world of sponsored posts and brand deals that seemed a million miles away from my cluttered apartment. Sending her my work felt like sending a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. But Jessica was right. Playing small wasn't going to get me anywhere. The next day, I spent hours crafting the perfect email. I didn't ask for a post or a promotion. I just told her my story, how I started the business, and how much I admired her work. I told her I'd love to send her a piece from my new collection. No strings attached, just as a thank you for inspiring independent creators like me. I chose my best piece, a delicate silver necklace with a single iridescent moonstone. It was the one I was most proud of. I packaged it in my nicest box, wrote a handwritten note, and sent it off. Then, I tried my best to forget about it. 2 weeks went by. I heard nothing. My sales continued their slow, steady trickle. The self-doubt started to creep back in. I imagined the necklace sitting in a pile of free stuff in Lauren's pristine apartment, forgotten. Maybe Uncle Kevin was right. Maybe this was all just a silly game. I was checking my email for the 100th time one Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. "Lauren has tagged you in a post." My heart stopped. I clicked on the notification. There it was. A beautiful sunlit photo of Lauren wearing my moonstone necklace. It was layered with a few other delicate chains, but mine was the clear centerpiece. The caption wasn't just a simple tag. She wrote a whole paragraph about discovering my shop, about loving the craftsmanship, and about the importance of supporting small, female-owned businesses. She linked to my shop in her bio. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unable to process it. Then my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. It was the notification sound from my sales app. A sound I usually heard a few times a day was now a constant, unrelenting buzz. I opened the app and watched in disbelief as the orders poured in. 10, 20, 50, 100. The moonstone necklace sold out in 15 minutes. Then people started buying other things. My entire new collection was gone in under an hour. I had made more money in 60 minutes than I had in the previous 6 months. I sank to the floor, my phone still buzzing in my hand like a frantic insect. I was laughing and crying at the same time. The sheer volume was overwhelming. How was I going to make and ship hundreds of orders by myself? It was a terrifying thought, but it was drowned out by a wave of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had done it. I had created something people actually wanted. All those lonely nights, all the sacrifices, all the condescending remarks from my family, they all faded into the background, replaced by the beautiful, chaotic music of my buzzing phone. I called Jessica, shouting into the phone before she could even say hello. "It worked! Oh my God, it actually worked!" We screamed together for a solid minute. "I told you," she finally said, her voice full of pride. "Now you have a new problem, my friend. You need to scale, and you need to do it yesterday." She was right. This wasn't the finish line. It was a new starting line. I had to figure out how to build a real company, not just a one-woman show in a cramped apartment. Later that evening, after the initial adrenaline rush had subsided, I got a text from my Uncle Kevin. It had nothing to do with my business, of course. He had no idea what had just happened. The text was a link to a job posting for an administrative assistant at his insurance company. "Thought you might be tired of playing with your beads," it read. I looked at the text, then at my laptop screen, which showed a list of 247 outstanding orders from all over the country. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a quiet, powerful sense of resolve. They still couldn't see the roots. But the tree was about to break through the ground, and it was going to be bigger than any of them could ever imagine. I deleted his text and got back to work. The 2 weeks that followed were a controlled hurricane in my one-bedroom apartment. I barely slept. My diet consisted of coffee and protein bars. My living room disappeared under a mountain of bubble mailers, shipping labels, and spools of silver wire. I hired a temp through an app for a few days just to help me pack boxes. Fulfilling 247 orders by myself was a logistical nightmare, a test of endurance I hadn't known I was capable of passing. My fingers were raw from twisting wire, and my back ached constantly from hunching over my workbench, but every single package I dropped off at the post office felt like a victory. When the last order from the initial surge was shipped, I collapsed onto my sofa, which was the only piece of furniture not covered in business supplies. I transferred the money from my business account to my personal one and just stared at the number. It was more than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to pay my rent for 2 years. Enough to finally breathe. Jessica came over that night with a bottle of champagne and 2 plastic cups. "To the new captain of industry," she toasted, her eyes sparkling. We sat on the floor amidst the debris of my success. "I can't keep doing this here," I said, gesturing around the chaotic apartment. "I'm sleeping next to my shipping tape. My kitchen table is my soldering station. It's not sustainable." "So, what's the next move?" Jessica asked, always practical. "You have capital now. Real capital. You can't just let it sit in your bank account." "I know," I said, a new kind of fear mixing with the excitement. "It's terrifying. What if that was just a fluke? A one-time thing?" "It wasn't a fluke," she said firmly. "It was proof of concept. Now you have to build the infrastructure to support it. You need a proper studio, Anna. A place where you can work, store your inventory, and maybe even hire a part-time assistant." The idea solidified in my mind. She was right. I had to stop thinking like a hobbyist who got lucky and start thinking like a business owner. We spent the next 2 days scouting for small commercial spaces. I found a place on the north side, a 500-square-foot studio in an old converted warehouse. It wasn't glamorous. It had concrete floors, one big industrial window, and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. But it was mine. It was a blank canvas. Standing in the empty room, the lease agreement in my hand, I felt a sense of possibility that was so big it almost scared me. This was real. This was the next step in growing the roots. I was in the middle of painting one of the walls a clean, bright white when my phone rang. It was Justin. I almost didn't answer. I hadn't spoken to him since that disastrous Sunday dinner months ago. Curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Anna," he said, his voice casual, as if he called me every day. "How's it going?" "I'm good, Justin. Busy," I replied, dipping my roller back into the paint tray. Yeah, always busy with the art stuff," he said dismissively. "Listen, I'm in a bit of a jam. You know that trip to Aspen I'm taking with some guys from the firm? Well, I kind of went a little over on the deposit for the ski lodge and my credit card is maxed out. Dad's being a real pain about it." I stopped painting. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass on his end of the line. He was probably sitting in his expensive condo looking out at the city skyline. "What do you need, Justin?" I asked, my voice flat. "I was just wondering if you could spot me a little cash," he said, his tone breezy. "Nothing crazy, just like 2,000? I'll pay you back next month when my bonus comes in. It would be a huge help." $2,000. He said it like it was pocket change. $2,000 was more than my entire business was worth just a few months ago. It was 2 months of my old rent, a mountain of groceries, an impossible sum, and he was asking for it to fund a ski trip, assuming I was the same struggling artist he could talk down to. The irony was so thick I could taste it. A slow smile spread across my face. He had no idea. None of them did. They were still living in a world where I was the family charity case, the girl playing with beads. They couldn't see the lease agreement on the counter, or the commercial-grade workbench being delivered tomorrow, or the balance in my bank account that could buy and sell his ski trip a dozen times over. "I'm sorry, Justin," I said, and the words felt like pure power. "I can't." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "You can't? Why not? It's not that much money, Anna. Don't you have a few $100 saved up from your little Etsy thing?" "No," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. "I don't. All my money is tied up right now. You'll have to ask someone else." He scoffed, a sound of pure, entitled disbelief. "Unbelievable. Fine. Whatever." He hung up without another word. I put my phone down and looked around my new empty studio. The single coat of white paint already made the space feel brighter, bigger. They were completely blind. And for the first time, I realized their ignorance wasn't an insult anymore. It was an advantage. It was my camouflage. They would never see me coming. And when they finally did, it would be far too late. I picked up my paint roller and got back to work. I had a business to build. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of construction and creation. I hired a handyman to install proper lighting and build custom workbenches along one wall of the studio. I spent a weekend with Jessica assembling flat-pack shelves and storage units until my hands were blistered. Slowly, the empty concrete box transformed into a real workspace. It smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, a clean scent of new beginnings that completely erased the memory of solder fumes in my tiny apartment. I established a routine. I'd arrive at 8 a.m., with coffee and work until late in the evening, designing new pieces, managing my website, and packing the steady stream of orders that continued to come in. The business was growing beyond what one person could handle. I was constantly running out of supplies. My bookkeeping was a mess of receipts stuffed in a shoebox, and I was turning down opportunities for custom work because I simply didn't have the time. "You need to hire someone," Jessica said during one of our weekly check-in calls. "Even just part-time, someone to pack orders and answer customer emails. You can't be the CEO and the mailroom clerk at the same time." The thought of being responsible for someone else's paycheck terrified me, but she was right. I put up a job posting on a local university's career board for a part-time studio assistant. A week later, I was interviewing a bright-eyed art student named Ashley. She walked in, her eyes wide as she took in the studio. "Wow," she said, running a hand over one of the finished workbenches. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it," I said with a smile. I liked her immediately. She had an eagerness that reminded me of myself a year ago. I hired her on the spot. Having Ashley changed everything. She was a fast learner and incredibly organized. While she handled the shipping and administrative tasks, I was free to focus on what I did best, designing and creating. With more time, I was able to expand my collection, experimenting with new metals and more intricate designs. I even launched a small line of custom engagement rings, which were an instant success. My monthly revenue doubled, then tripled. I was officially a 6-figure business, and no one in my family had a clue. The quiet satisfaction of my secret success was my constant companion. One afternoon, while sketching a new earring design, my phone buzzed. It was Uncle Kevin. My stomach tightened, a Pavlovian response to his name on my screen. "Anna, hello," he said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Just calling to see how you are. Your aunt was asking about you." "I'm fine, Uncle Kevin. Just working," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Right, the work," he chuckled. "Listen, I have some wonderful news. You know my secretary, Carol? She's retiring at the end of the year. A lovely woman, but it's time. Anyway, I was talking to Human Resources, and I might be able to pull some strings to get you an interview for her position." I was silent, stunned by the sheer audacity. His secretary. He was offering me a job as his secretary. "It's a great opportunity, Anna," he continued, oblivious to my silence. "A real job. Stable salary, benefits, paid vacation. You'd be answering phones, managing my calendar. You're good with details, right? It's perfect for you. You could finally put that little bead hobby to rest." I looked around my sun-drenched studio. Ashley was in the corner, carefully boxing a $2,000 custom diamond ring to be shipped to a client in California. My design board was covered in sketches for a collection that a boutique in New York had asked to carry exclusively. The spreadsheets open on my laptop showed a projected annual revenue that was more than double his salary as a regional manager. A real job. I took a deep breath, a strange calm settling over me. There was no anger left, only a profound sense of distance. We were living in different universes. In his, he was generously offering me a lifeline. In mine, he was offering to trade my thriving kingdom for a broom closet in his castle. That's a very thoughtful offer, Uncle Kevin, I said, the words carefully chosen. But I'm going to have to decline. Decline? He sounded genuinely shocked. Why? Anna, this is a serious career path. You're not getting any younger. You can't just play with jewelry forever. I'm happy with the path I'm on, I said firmly. But thank you for thinking of me. He huffed into the phone. Suit yourself. Don't come crying to me when the rent is due and you've got nothing to show for it but a box of unsold trinkets. Some people just don't know what's good for them. He hung up. I put the phone down, a small smile playing on my lips. Ashley looked over at me, curious. Everything okay? Everything is perfect, I said, picking up my pencil. I looked at the half-finished sketch, a complex design of interlocking silver leaves. It was intricate work, requiring patience and a steady hand. It was another root, growing stronger and deeper in the quiet of my studio, completely unseen by the people who thought they knew me best. And soon, very soon, the ground was going to shake. The next 6 months were a blur of controlled chaos. We outgrew my one-bedroom apartment, the boxes of silver and gold spilling out into the hallway, until my landlord gave me a final warning. Ashley and I found a new studio space in an old converted warehouse, a huge light-filled loft with exposed brick walls and massive windows overlooking the city. It cost a fortune, but our sales had tripled. I even hired 2 more people, a young woman named Grace to manage our social media and a man named William who was a master goldsmith to help with the more complex custom orders. The silence from my family was absolute. After that last phone call, Uncle Kevin seemed to have written me off completely. I'd see pictures on my mom's social media feed from family barbecues and holiday dinners I wasn't invited to. There they were, smiling for the camera, with captions like, "So proud of Justin's latest courtroom victory," or "celebrating Kevin's big promotion." I was a ghost, an unspoken disappointment. It hurt, but the hum of my growing business was a comforting sound that drowned out the silence. My father always said that the tallest trees grow in silence, but their fall makes the most noise. I held on to that thought, letting it fuel me during the 16-hour days. One Tuesday morning, an email landed in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart stop. Feature inquiry, Forbes magazine. I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the text. It was from an editor named Rachel. She was writing a piece for their 30 Under 30 issue and wanted to feature my company, highlighting its explosive growth in the e-commerce space. I read the email 3 times before I yelled for Ashley. She ran over, thinking something was wrong. I just pointed at the screen, unable to form words. Her eyes widened, and then she let out a shriek that made William drop a tiny gold setting on the floor. Forbes. They wanted to write about us. About me. A week later, Rachel came to the studio with a photographer. She was sharp, professional, and asked questions that cut right to the heart of my journey. She wasn't interested in the glossy, curated version of success. She wanted the grit. She asked about the early days in my cramped apartment, the all-nighters, the moments of doubt. "And your family," Rachel said, her pen poised over her notepad. "Have they been a big source of support?" The question hung in the air. I thought of Uncle Kevin's offer, of Justin's smirk. I could have told her the truth, given her the dramatic story of the underestimated niece who proved everyone wrong. But it felt cheap. My success wasn't about them, it was about me. "My business is my focus," I said, choosing my words carefully, just as I had with my uncle. I've been fortunate to build a strong support system within my team. I gestured to Ashley and Grace, who were trying to look busy, but were clearly listening to every word. Rachel smiled, a knowing look in her eyes, and jotted something down. The photo shoot was surreal. They had me pose at my workbench, my hands covered in the familiar fine gray dust of polished silver. They took pictures of my design sketches, of the rows of neatly packed boxes ready for shipping, of the intricate, glittering pieces that were once just ideas in my head. For the first time, I saw my little hobby through someone else's eyes. It wasn't just beads and wires. It was an empire in the making. After they left, the studio felt unnaturally quiet. The energy of the day had vanished, leaving behind a nervous excitement. "What if they make me sound silly?" I asked Ashley, voicing my biggest fear. She stopped taping a box and looked at me. "Anna, they're Forbes. They're not writing about your little bead hobby. They're writing about a 7-figure business that you built from nothing in your living room. The only people who will look silly are the ones who ever doubted you." The article was scheduled to be published online in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. I tried to focus on work, on a new collection inspired by ancient Roman coins, but my mind kept drifting. I imagined my Uncle Kevin scrolling through his newsfeed on his lunch break. I pictured Justin seeing the headline shared by one of his colleagues. What would they think? What would they do? The ground had been rumbling for months, a low, deep vibration that only I could feel. Now, it felt like the whole world was about to shake. The 2 weeks that followed felt like holding my breath underwater. Every ping from my phone made me jump, thinking it was a notification that the article was live. I threw myself into work, sketching new designs until my fingers were stiff and my eyes burned. Ashley, Grace, and William were amazing, sensing my nervous energy and channeling it into productivity. We organized the inventory, streamlined the shipping process, and prepared for a holiday rush that was still months away. We were a well-oiled machine running on caffeine and anticipation. I was so focused on preparing the business for what might come that I barely had time to think about what it would mean for me. Then, on a Tuesday morning, it happened. I was in the middle of soldering a delicate silver chain when Ashley let out a gasp from her desk. It wasn't a shriek like before, but a quiet, sharp intake of air. "Anna," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's here." I put down the soldering iron, my hands suddenly unsteady. I walked over to her computer, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was, on the Forbes homepage. The headline was simple, bold, and took my breath away. From beads and wires to a business empire. How Anna built a 7-figure brand from her living room. And underneath it was a picture of me. Not a selfie, not a posed, smiling photo from a family event. It was me at my workbench, my face serious with concentration, a pair of pliers in my hand, surrounded by the beautiful, chaotic mess of my own creation. They hadn't made me look silly. They had made me look powerful. We read the article together, our heads huddled close to the screen. Rachel had captured everything. She wrote about the 16-hour days, the initial investment I saved up from 3 different part-time jobs, the passion for creating something beautiful and lasting. She quoted me talking about my design process, about the importance of ethical sourcing for my materials. She even mentioned my team, calling Ashley my indispensable right hand. Ashley squeezed my arm when she read that part, her eyes shining. The article didn't mention my family by name. There was only that one diplomatic line I had given Rachel. I've been fortunate to build a strong support system within my team. Reading it now, it felt less like a dodge and more like the absolute truth. These people were my support system. This studio was my home. By the time we finished reading, my phone was already buzzing on my desk. Then Ashley's phone started. Then the company email inbox began to chime, over and over, like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. The rest of the day was a blur. The article was shared on Twitter by a major tech CEO. Then a fashion blogger with millions of followers posted it on Instagram. Our website traffic exploded. The order notifications on our sales app, which usually trickled in at a steady pace, became a constant, unending waterfall of sound. William and Grace were running back and forth from the packing station, their faces a mixture of panic and pure joy. "We're going to sell out of the Roman coin collection by noon," William shouted over the noise. "I'm getting emails from distributors in Japan and the UK," Ashley yelled, her fingers flying across her keyboard. I stood in the middle of the studio, watching the controlled chaos swirl around me. My phone was vibrating so hard on the workbench it was about to fall off. Notifications poured in, LinkedIn requests, Instagram follows, emails from venture capitalists wanting to schedule a call. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. I looked at the beautiful, organized shelves of jewelry, the rows of boxes ready to be shipped, the dedicated people working tirelessly around me. I thought of my father's words again, how they echoed in my mind with a new, profound clarity. The tallest trees grow in silence, but their fall makes the most noise. This wasn't a fall, it was an earthquake. And the sound it was making was deafening. We worked until well past midnight, fueled by adrenaline and 3 large pizzas. By the time I locked up the studio, I was so tired my bones ached, but I had never felt more alive. I walked home through the quiet Chicago streets, the cool night air feeling wonderful on my face. I didn't even check my phone. I just wanted to savor the feeling of the ground shifting beneath my feet. When I got back to my apartment, the same small place where it all began, I finally looked at my phone. 217 text messages, dozens of missed calls. I scrolled through them, my thumb getting tired. Messages from old college friends, from former colleagues, all congratulating me. And then I saw it. A missed call from a number I knew by heart, but hadn't seen on my screen in months. Uncle Kevin. He had called 3 times. My Uncle Kevin and Cousin Justin belittled me at Sunday dinner, mocking my little beads and wires. What would you do in my place? Comment your thoughts and share if you faced similar family judgment. Then there was a text message from him sent an hour ago. My blood ran cold. I expected anger, sarcasm, maybe even a dismissive congrats. But the message was just 4 words, and they were more shocking than any insult could have been. We need to talk. I stared at the 4 words on my screen. We need to talk. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. The same tone my Uncle Kevin used when he was about to lecture me on the importance of a 401k and a real job. For years, his words had been little paper cuts, small stings of disapproval that I tried to ignore. But this felt different. This felt like a crack in the foundation of the world I knew. The world where I was the quirky niece with the silly hobby, and he was the titan of regional insurance sales. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. A dozen sarcastic replies flashed through my mind. Sorry, busy running my online business, was the frontrunner. But I didn't type anything. I just locked the screen and placed the phone face down on my cluttered coffee table. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I was the one in control of the conversation. I would decide when and if it happened. The next morning, I walked into the studio and the energy was electric. It was like walking into a power plant. William and Grace were already there, surrounded by a mountain of shipping boxes that hadn't existed the day before. Ashley was on the phone, her voice crisp and professional, negotiating with a buyer from a high-end boutique in New York. No, I understand, Ashley was saying. But with the current demand, we can't promise the entire collection until the next quarter. Yes, I can send you the wholesale catalog. Of course. She winked at me as she scribbled a note. New York? I mouthed silently. She nodded, a huge grin spreading across her face. Saks Fifth Avenue. My jaw dropped. Saks Fifth Avenue. The place I used to press my face against the glass as a teenager, dreaming of being able to afford a single scarf from their displays. Now they wanted to carry my jewelry. The beautiful, organized chaos of the day before hadn't been a one-time fluke. It was our new reality. My phone, which I'd put on silent, lit up on my workbench. It was a text from my cousin, Justin. My stomach twisted. I expected another jab, maybe a sarcastic, "Heard you're famous now." But his message was sickeningly sweet. Hey, Anna, wow, saw the Forbes thing. So proud of you, cuz. Knew you always had it in you. We should celebrate when you have a minute. Dad's really impressed, too. I read it twice. Dad's really impressed, too. It was the casual way he dropped it in, as if my Uncle Kevin's approval was a prize I'd finally won. The hypocrisy was so thick I felt like I could choke on it. I showed the message to Ashley. She snorted. Oh, now they're proud. Funny how that works. She looked at me, her expression softening. You don't have to answer any of them, you know. Not until you're ready. I knew she was right. I had a business to run, a real one. We spent the next 2 days in a whirlwind. I hired 2 temporary staff just to help with packing orders. William was promoted to head of logistics, a title we made up on the spot, but he beamed with pride. I had a Zoom call with a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, a man named Patrick, who used words like scalability and market disruption. He wanted to invest, to pour millions into my company to help it grow. It was surreal. I was still the same woman who ate ramen noodles over her sink some nights, but now I was discussing 7-figure investments. Through it all, the messages from my family kept coming. Another text from Kevin. "Anna, I'm serious. This is important." A voicemail from my aunt, her voice fluttering with a strange, forced cheerfulness, asking when I was coming for dinner. It was a coordinated attack of sudden affection. They were circling, drawn by the scent of success like sharks to blood. On the 3rd night, after another 16-hour day, I was sitting alone in my quiet studio. The last of the day's packages were stacked by the door, ready for morning pickup. The silver wire gleamed under the soft lights. I picked up a half-finished necklace, the cold metal familiar and comforting in my hands. This was real. The weight of the silver, the precision of the tools, the satisfaction of creating something with my own 2 hands. This was my world, the one I had built in silence while they laughed. I thought about all those Sunday dinners, the condescending questions, the smug looks exchanged between Kevin and Justin. They had never once asked about my creative process. They never cared about the inspiration behind a design or the challenge of sourcing a specific gemstone. They only saw the lack of a corporate logo on a business card. They saw a failure. And now, all they saw was a $sign in a Forbes headline. My phone buzzed again. It was Kevin. He was calling this time. The screen lit up with his name, a name that for so long had been synonymous with judgment. I looked at the call, then around my studio, at the evidence of my hard work, my passion, my success. My success, not theirs. I let it go to voicemail. A few moments later, a new text popped up. "Anna, pick up the phone. Your cousin Justin is in some serious trouble. He needs your help." My heart hammered against my ribs. Trouble? What kind of trouble? This was a new tactic. The fake pride hadn't worked, so now it was a crisis. A crisis only I, with my newfound success, could apparently solve. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost insulting. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't falling for it. I was just gathering information. I finally picked up my phone. My fingers felt steady. I wasn't the nervous girl seeking their approval anymore. I typed a short, simple reply to my Uncle Kevin. "What kind of trouble?" The reply from Kevin came less than a minute later, so fast it was clear he'd been waiting with his phone in his hand. "He got involved with some bad people, Anna, some very risky investments. He thought it was a sure thing, but it all fell apart. He stands to lose everything, his house, his savings. He might even face legal issues that could damage his father's firm. He's in over his head." The words were carefully chosen to sound desperate, but all I saw was a script. It was vague, dramatic, and designed to pull at family heartstrings that I was pretty sure I no longer had. I read the message again. Legal issues. That was the bait. They were trying to scare me into action. I took a screenshot and sent it to Ashley with a single question. "What do you think?" Her reply was instant. "I think bad people is code for he was greedy and stupid. And risky investments means he probably bought into some crypto scam he saw on TikTok. Don't answer him." I stared at the 2 conversations on my screen. One from a family trying to manipulate me, the other from a friend trying to protect me. It was a perfect summary of my life. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The old Anna would have been frantic, worried about her cousin despite everything. The new Anna just felt tired of their games. My grandfather always said that a lie can run a mile, but the truth will always finish the race. I had a feeling Kevin's lie was just getting started, and I wanted to see how this particular race ended. "I'm not going to answer him," I texted Ashley, "but I want to know what's really going on." "Good," she replied. "Let me do some digging. A guy like Justin, who loves to show off, probably leaves a trail of breadcrumbs all over the internet. Give me a few hours." While Ashley played detective, the assault on my phone continued. Another text from Kevin. "Anna, His mother is beside herself. Just talk to him, please. Then a call, which I ignored. Then a voicemail, his voice strained with fake emotion. We always knew you were special, Anna. We were just hard on you because we wanted you to succeed. We see that now. We're so proud. But your family needs you. Don't turn your back on us now. It was disgusting. The sudden rewriting of history, the attempt to paint their mockery as tough love. They weren't proud. They were cornered. They didn't love me. They loved what my Forbes cover represented. A solution. A bank. An easy way out of a mess of their own making. I put my phone on silent and tried to focus on work. I reviewed the investment proposal from Patrick, the VC from Silicon Valley. His offer was serious, potentially life-changing for my company. It would mean scaling up faster than I ever dreamed, hiring a real team, moving out of my apartment and into a proper studio. It was the future, right there in a PDF file. But in the back of my mind, I was waiting for Ashley's message. It came around midnight. It wasn't a long text, just a link to a local business journal's website. The headline read, "Local luxury condo development stalls amid fraud allegations. Investors face total loss." I clicked the link. My hands were shaking slightly. The article detailed a high-end real estate project that had collapsed. The developers had allegedly used investor funds for personal expenses and misrepresented the project's viability. And then, halfway down the page, was a list of prominent local investors who had poured money into the scheme. Right there, in black and white, was the name. Justin. He wasn't just a small investor. The article mentioned he'd leveraged his position at his father's firm to secure a massive loan for his stake in the project. He hadn't just made a bad investment. He had committed potential fraud and put his entire family's legacy on the line. The article said the developers had vanished and the FBI was now involved. This was far beyond a bad investment. This was a catastrophe of his own creation. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Kevin. "Anna, I'm begging you. He needs a lawyer, a good one. We can't afford it. You're our only hope." I looked at the news article, then at the pathetic plea from my uncle. They hadn't told me the truth. They had given me a sanitized, pathetic story to get my money. They didn't want my help. They wanted me to clean up a mess that was about to become a public scandal. They wanted to hide their shame behind my success. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about respect, and they had never shown me an ounce of it. I didn't reply to Kevin. I opened my email and pulled up the contact information for Patrick, the investor. My fingers moved quickly across the screen. I had a business to build. I had a future to secure. My future, not theirs. I hit the call button. "Patrick?" I said when he answered, my voice steady and clear. "It's Anna. I've reviewed your offer. I'm ready to talk about the next steps." The line was quiet for a moment and I could hear the faint sound of city traffic on his end. "Anna," Patrick said, his voice warm and professional. "I'm glad you called. I was hoping to hear from you. Are you ready to build an empire?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. "I am," I said. "Let's talk numbers and timelines. I want a new studio space secured by the end of the month, and I want to start hiring a design team immediately." We spent the next hour mapping out the future. We talked about a 7-figure seed investment, a valuation that made my head spin, and a 5-year plan for expansion into international markets. Every word he said felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of my new life, a life built far away from the petty jealousies of my family. After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights glittered like a sea of scattered diamonds. For the first time, I didn't feel like a small-town girl playing business. I felt like I belonged here. I had earned my place among those lights. My phone was still on silent, sitting on the counter, a dark, silent rectangle of their desperation. I didn't even have the urge to check it. Their world of lies and panic felt a million miles away. A sharp, insistent knock on my apartment door shattered the peace. It wasn't the gentle tap of a delivery person. It was frantic. I sighed, knowing exactly who it would be. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Kevin, his face red and blotchy, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman I hadn't seen in over a year, my Aunt Janice, Justin's mother. Her eyes were puffy and swollen, her usually perfect hair was a mess, and she was clutching a damp tissue in her hand. The guilt trip had arrived in person. I opened the door. Kevin started talking before I could even say a word. "Anna, thank God. You weren't answering your phone. We were so worried." His voice was a performance of concern that made my skin crawl. Janice just sobbed quietly beside him. "What do you want, Kevin?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. "It's Justin," Janice finally choked out, looking at me with pleading eyes. He's not himself. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He could lose everything. His career, his future, our family's name." She was trying to appeal to a sense of family honor that they themselves had trampled on for years. "He didn't make a mistake, Aunt Janice," I said, my voice calm and steady. "He made a choice. He chose to get involved in a fraudulent business deal. He chose to use his position at his father's firm to get a loan he couldn't afford. And now the FBI is involved. This is much bigger than a bad investment, isn't it?" Kevin's face went from fake concern to pure fury. Who told you that?" he sputtered. "Have you been spying on us?" The accusation was so absurd it was almost funny. "You don't have to spy on people who leave a trail of destruction a mile wide, Uncle Kevin. It's in the news. You lied to me. You came to me with a sob story about a bad investment, hoping I'd write a check without asking questions. You didn't come for help. You came for a bailout to cover up a scandal." "He's your cousin," Janice wailed. "We're family. You have all this money now. What's the point of having it if you can't help your own blood?" That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowing their insults, of smiling through their mockery. It all vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Family?" I repeated the word, and it tasted like ash in my mouth. Where was this family when I was working 18-hour days, living on instant noodles because every penny I had went into this business? Where was this family when you all sat around the dinner table laughing at my little hobby? You're not my family. You are a group of people who share some DNA with me. Family supports each other. They don't mock you in the bad times and then show up with their hands out in the good times. I looked directly at Kevin. "You want a lawyer for Justin? He should have thought of that before he committed fraud. My success is not your emergency fund." I then turned to Janice, my voice softening just a fraction, but still firm. "I'm sorry for your pain, Aunt Janice, truly. But I am not the solution to your son's problems. He created this mess. He needs to be the one to face the consequences." I took a step back and began to close the door. "Please don't come here again." Kevin opened his mouth to say something else, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, but I didn't wait to hear it. I shut the door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The sound of their muffled shouting eventually faded as they walked away. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. I walked back to my desk, picked up the printed proposal from Patrick, and started making notes. I had an empire to build. The silence that followed their departure was heavier than their shouting had been. For a long moment, I just stood with my back against the door, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart. It wasn't fear or regret I felt, but the strange, clean emptiness after a storm has passed. The air in my apartment seemed clearer, lighter. I pushed myself off the door, walked back to my desk, and looked at the business proposal from Patrick. The numbers and projections on the page were solid, real. They were the opposite of the desperate, hollow words my Uncle Kevin had thrown at me. The next few weeks were a blur of focused energy. Patrick was true to his word. He wasn't just an investor, he was a mentor. We spent hours on video calls, vetting commercial real estate listings. He taught me what to look for, how to negotiate, how to see the potential in a raw space. "Think 5 years ahead, Anna," he'd say, his voice crisp through my laptop speakers. "Where will you be then? Build the space for that company, not the one you have today." We found it a week later. A 2,000-square-foot loft in the West Loop, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and massive windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was an old industrial building that had been converted into artist studios and tech startups. The rent was more than my entire apartment cost for a year, but when I signed the lease, my hand didn't shake. This was an investment in my future, a declaration of intent. Moving day felt surreal. Instead of me struggling with a few boxes, a professional moving crew handled everything. As they set up workstations and shelving units in the vast, open space, I felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost knocked me over. This was mine. I had built this from nothing, from beads and wires on a cluttered desk in a tiny apartment. My first hire was a young designer named Megan, I found through a university art program. She was quiet, brilliant, and her hands moved with a delicate precision that reminded me of my own when I first started. During her interview, she looked around the empty studio with wide, hopeful eyes. "What you've built online is incredible, Anna," she said, clutching her portfolio. "The way you tell a story with each piece, I've been following you for years." Her words were a balm to wounds I didn't even know were still there. Hiring her was the easiest decision I'd ever made. One afternoon, a few weeks after we'd settled in, Megan and I were laying out designs for a new collection on a huge workbench. The sun streamed through the windows, catching the silver and gemstones, making them glitter. The space was filled with the low hum of creative energy. It was a peaceful, productive rhythm I had craved for years. As I watched Megan carefully place a tiny sapphire into a silver setting, I thought of my father. He had been a carpenter, a man who believed in solid construction and honest work. My father always said, "You can't build a strong house on a rotten foundation." He'd been talking about wood and nails, but I understood now he meant so much more. My business was built on late nights, on quality materials, on a direct and honest relationship with my customers. Justin's life, his career, was built on his father's name, on shortcuts, on a foundation of entitlement and fraud. It was no wonder his house was collapsing. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, expecting an email from a supplier. It was a news alert from a Chicago business journal. The headline made my breath catch. Local law firm scion Justin Evans formally charged in multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme. The article was short, clinical. It detailed how he had used his position to secure fraudulent loans for a development project that never existed. It mentioned a federal investigation and the likelihood of a long prison sentence. There was a photo of him leaving a courthouse, his face pale and drawn, his expensive suit looking rumpled and cheap. He looked like a stranger. I felt a distant, detached pity, like watching a movie about someone else's tragedy. I closed the notification and went back to work. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox that changed everything. The subject line was simple: "Interview request, Forbes magazine." I clicked it open, my heart starting to pound again, but this time for a very different reason. The email was from a senior editor. She wrote that she had been following my brand's explosive growth and was working on a feature story for their 30 Under 30 issue. She wanted to feature me and my company. She wanted to tell my story. I read the email 3 times. Forbes, the magazine that sat on the coffee tables of people like my Uncle Kevin, the ultimate symbol of legitimate, undeniable success. They wanted to write about my little hobby. I stood up and walked to the massive window overlooking the city. The skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, a testament to ambition and steel. They didn't know the half of my story, but they were about to, and so was everyone else. I took a deep breath and started typing my reply. "Dear Ms. Davis," I wrote, "I would be delighted." The interview was scheduled for 2 days later. The morning of, I walked into my studio and was greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and the quiet, focused energy of Megan already at her workbench. She looked up and gave me a small, encouraging smile. "You're going to be great, Anna," she said, before turning her attention back to a delicate silver chain. Her simple confidence was more reassuring than any pep talk could have been. At 10 a.m., sharp, the Forbes team arrived. There were 3 of them: a photographer named James with cases of equipment, his assistant, and the journalist, a woman in her early 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes who introduced herself as Caroline. She shook my hand firmly. "Anna, it's a pleasure. The space is incredible." Her eyes swept over the loft, taking in the high ceilings, the organized workstations, the racks of finished jewelry gleaming under the track lighting, and the massive windows with the Chicago skyline as a backdrop. It was a long way from my cramped apartment, and the look on her face told me she understood that immediately. We sat at a large reclaimed wood table in the center of the studio. James and his assistant began setting up lights in the background, their movements quiet and professional. "So," Caroline began, opening her notebook, "your revenue growth is astounding, up 800% in the last 18 months. That's what got our attention. But I'm more interested in the story behind the numbers. Where did this all begin?" I took a breath and told her everything. I told her about the late nights, the soldering iron burns on my fingers, the feeling of packing the first 100 orders on my bedroom floor. I told her about my passion for creating something tangible and beautiful. I didn't mention my family's mockery specifically. It felt petty and small in the context of this new reality. Instead, I focused on the drive it gave me. "I think when people doubt you," I said carefully, "it can either crush you or it can become the fuel you use to build your engine. I chose to build an engine." Caroline scribbled furiously in her notebook. "And what's the guiding principle of your business? What's the core philosophy?" I looked over at Megan, who was now polishing a finished piece, her movements a study in concentration. I thought of the solid weight of my father's hammer in my hand when I was a child. "My father was a carpenter," I said, my voice steady. "He wasn't a businessman, but he taught me the most important business lesson I've ever learned. He always said, 'You can't build a strong house on a rotten foundation.' I built this company on quality, on transparency with my customers, and on honest work. There are no shortcuts to something that's meant to last." I saw Caroline underline the quote in her notes. The words felt truer now than they ever had. The interview lasted for 2 hours. After we were done, James, the photographer, took over. He had me pose at my workbench, my tools laid out before me. He took shots of me and Megan collaborating on a design. He took a stunning portrait of me standing by the large window, the city stretching out behind me. "Just look out at the city, Anna," he directed. "Look like you own it." In that moment, for the first time, I felt like I actually did. After they left, the studio felt quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was filled with the echo of possibility. Megan brought me a cup of tea. "That was amazing to watch," she said, her eyes shining. "They saw it. They really saw what you've built." The next afternoon, I got an email from Caroline. "Anna," it read, "thank you again for your time. This is one of the most compelling startup stories I've heard in years. The piece is being fast-tracked for the website. It should go live tomorrow morning. I'll send you the link as soon as it's up. Get ready." Get ready. My heart did a little flip in my chest. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of nervous excitement, trying to focus on designs, but my mind kept drifting. I thought about my Uncle Kevin, my Aunt Janice, and Justin. I wondered if they would see it. For so long, their opinion was the distorted mirror in which I saw my own reflection. But now, it didn't matter. Forbes was a mirror that couldn't be distorted. It reflected only facts, numbers, and success. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 8:02 a.m. It was the link from Caroline. I clicked on it, my breath held tight in my lungs. The page loaded, and there it was. A headline in bold black letters that seemed to jump off the screen. "From hobby to empire. How Anna built a multi-million-dollar jewelry brand from her bedroom floor." And below it was the photo of me, standing against the window with the Chicago skyline at my back, looking like I owned the whole world. I started to read my own story, told back to me in the undeniable language of success. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The article didn't just go live, it exploded. My phone began to vibrate so intensely on my nightstand that it sounded like an angry hornet. It was a cascade of notifications from Instagram, LinkedIn, my website's sales app, and a dozen news outlets picking up the story. The Forbes feature was trending on Twitter. By noon, we had sold more jewelry than we had in the entire previous month. Megan had to call in 2 temporary workers just to help with packing orders. The studio, once my quiet sanctuary, was now a buzzing hub of happy chaos. The sound of shipping tape being pulled from the roll was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I ignored the dozens of texts from old high school friends and distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. But I knew the call I was waiting for would come eventually. It came 2 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon. The caller ID showed my Aunt Janice's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a slow, calming breath. "Hello," I said, my voice even. "Anna, darling." Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone she reserved for when she wanted something. "I saw the article. Oh, we are all just so proud of you. Your Uncle Kevin was just saying last night how he always knew you had that creative spark. We're just bursting with pride." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. I could almost hear her smile faltering on the other end. "Is there something I can help you with, Aunt Janice?" I asked, keeping my tone polite but distant. She cleared her throat. "Well, it's a bit of a delicate matter, dear. You know your Uncle Kevin has had some reversals at work. The company is downsizing. It's all very unfair. We were wondering, seeing as you're doing so wonderfully, if you might be in a position to help us out. Just a small loan to tide us over." A small loan. After years of mockery, after being the family punchline, they wanted a loan. "I think," I said slowly, "this is a conversation we should have in person. Why don't you and Kevin and Justin come to my studio tomorrow? Say 11 a.m.? The next morning, they arrived right on time. They stood in the entrance of my loft studio, looking completely out of place. My Uncle Kevin, usually so loud and expansive, seemed to have shrunk inside his ill-fitting suit. Justin stood behind him, his eyes darting around the space, avoiding my gaze. He looked less like a hotshot lawyer and more like a kid who had been called to the principal's office. I led them to the large reclaimed wood table where I had been interviewed by Caroline. I offered them coffee, which they accepted awkwardly. Megan gave me a quick, supportive glance from across the room before disappearing into the inventory office to give us privacy. "This is quite an operation you have here, Anna," Kevin said, trying for a jovial tone that fell completely flat. He gestured vaguely at the workstations. "Who knew all that playing with beads and wires would lead to this?" I didn't smile. "It's an online business," I said, using his own words, the air quotes hanging invisibly between us. "What can I do for you?" Kevin's false cheer evaporated. "Look, Anna, we're family, and we're in trouble. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. My pension is gone. We need $200,000. I stared at him. $200,000. The number was so absurd, so audacious, that I almost laughed. Justin finally spoke up, his voice low. "We can draw up a legal agreement, with interest. This would be a formal investment, Anna, a bridge loan." I leaned back in my chair, looking from my uncle's desperate face to my cousin's humbled one. I thought of all the Sunday dinners, the snide remarks, the dismissive laughter. I thought of the nights I'd worked until my fingers were raw and my eyes burned from staring at a screen, all while they slept soundly, secure in their belief that my dreams were a joke. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table with the weight of a slab of concrete. Kevin's face turned red. "No. What do you mean, no? We're your family. You owe us. We fed you. We clothed you." "You belittled me," I countered, my voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "You mocked my work, my ambition, my entire life's passion. You never once offered a word of encouragement. You never asked how you could help. You just laughed." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline that now felt like it belonged to me. "My father, your brother," I said, looking at Kevin, "was a carpenter. He wasn't a fancy regional manager or a lawyer. He worked with his hands, but he taught me something you never understood." I turned back to face them. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "He always said, 'You can't build a strong house on a rotten foundation.' I built this business on quality and hard work. I built my life on self-respect." I took a step closer to the table. The foundation of our relationship, Uncle Kevin, is rotten. It's built on your mockery and my resentment. You want me to build a bridge loan on that? You want me to pour my money, the money I earned while you were laughing at me, into a foundation that you yourselves poisoned? I looked directly at him. A house built on a rotten foundation will always collapse, and I will not let my success be used as a patch for the cracks in yours. There was a dead silence in the room. Justin finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine shame in his eyes. Kevin just stared, his mouth slightly open, the last of his bluster gone. They had come here expecting to leverage family guilt, but they had found only a mirror reflecting their own ugliness. "I think you should go," I said softly. Without another word, they stood up and walked out of my studio. I watched them go. Two men who had once seemed like giants to me, now looking small and defeated. When the door closed behind them, a profound sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't triumph, it was just quiet. The metallic smell of solder, the hum of the polishing wheel, the light streaming through the massive windows, it was all mine. I had built my house on solid ground, and it was strong enough to withstand any storm. He said you can't build on a rotten foundation. I built my business on quality and hard work, my life on self-respect. They came expecting guilt, but found a mirror. What did you think of my final stand? Subscribe for more stories of resilience.